Coins and cards are boring. For most of history, people paid rent with fish, shells, pepper, even giant rocks nobody could move. In this video, we're going through 44 of the dumbest, weirdest currencies humans ever trusted, from Aztec cocoa banks to denim black markets. By the end, your wallet will feel like the most normal thing in the world. 1. The people on the island of Yap clearly didn't understand the concept of pocket change because their money consisted of giant limestone donuts that weighed more than a house. These rocks were so absurdly heavy that nobody even bothered moving them during a transaction. You just pointed at a massive stone down the road and told your neighbor that it belonged to him now. One time, a crew was transporting a giant coin on a raft and it sank to the bottom of the ocean, but the banking committee just shrugged and said it still counted. The economy was literally based on pretending that a rock under the sea was in your bank account. 2. The ancient Romans were famous for their hygiene, which is ironic because they taxed urine and used it as a liquid asset. Emperor Vespasian noticed that laundromats used stale urine to bleach togas because of the ammonia, so he slapped a tax on public urinals. When his son complained that taxing pee was gross, Vespasian held up a gold coin and famously said, "Money does not stink." It is a cool quote, but it doesn't change the fact that the Roman economy was partially floated by gallons of public pee. Basically, every time a Roman went to the bathroom, he was making a deposit into the imperial treasury. 3. In ancient Egypt, the pharaohs figured out the ultimate way to keep construction workers happy. They paid them in beer. I'm not kidding. The guys building the pyramids were receiving about 4 liters of thick, nutritious beer every single day as their official salary. It was basically a liquid paycheck. This means the greatest architectural wonders of the ancient world were built by guys who were technically buzzed before lunch. It really explains why the Sphinx is missing a nose. Someone probably had one too many paydays and slipped with the chisel. 4. When the British sent convicts to Australia, they forgot to send enough actual money, so the entire continent just turned into a giant frat party and started using rum as cash. For years, hard liquor was the official way to pay for everything from farm equipment to legal fees. The military officers in charge were even nicknamed the Rum Corps because they spent more time trading booze than doing any actual work. It got so ridiculous that when a governor tried to ban the use of alcohol as money, the military staged the only armed takeover in Australian history. They literally overthrew the government to protect their right to pay with cocktails. 5. In parts of Siberia and Asia, the locals were apparently so hungry they decided to make their money edible. They used compressed bricks of tea leaves as hard cash. These things were rock solid because they mixed the tea with flour or even manure to make it stick together. The best part about this financial system is that if the stock market crashed or you just got a little chilly, you could break off a piece of your savings and boil it for a drink. You have to respect an economy where you can literally snack on your retirement fund if you get the munchies. 6. Medieval Russia had an economy that smelled like a wet dog because they decided that the best form of currency was squirrel fur. Forget about gold or silver. If you wanted to be a big shot in Novgorod, you needed a coat full of dead rodents. It gets even stupider when you realize how they made small change for cheap items. They used random loose parts like dried ears and claws as pennies. Imagine standing in line at the grocery store and paying for your milk with a handful of fuzzy ears while everyone just nods like it is a normal financial transaction. It was the only time in history when your wallet could get fleas. 7. The Kissy people of West Africa used twisted iron rods that looked like broken fence posts, but they came with the most complicated user agreement in history. These iron sticks were believed to have souls, which makes them the most emotional currency ever invented. If you accidentally dropped one and it broke, the money didn't just lose value, it spiritually died. You couldn't just glue it back together. You had to hire a special witch doctor to perform a magical ceremony to reincarnate your change. Imagine if you had to call a priest every time you ripped a dollar bill just to buy a candy bar. 8. In New France, which is now Canada, the government was so bad at planning that they ran out of coins completely. Instead of waiting for a shipment from Paris, the governor just grabbed a deck of playing cards, signed his name on the back, and told everyone it was legal tender. Suddenly, soldiers were getting paid in aces and kings. It sounds like a joke, but this card-based economy actually worked for decades. It is hilarious to think that the entire financial stability of a colony depended on nobody losing the jack of spades during a windy day. 9. The Spartans were the tough guys of the ancient world, and they hated wealth so much they made their money intentionally annoying. They used big, heavy iron sticks called pellinors that were soaked in vinegar to make the metal brittle and useless for anything else. If you wanted to buy something simple like a cow, you needed a literal wagon to haul your cash around. They made being rich such a massive headache that nobody wanted to bother with it. It was the ultimate anti-capitalist move, where buying a loaf of bread required a workout routine. 10. Ancient Roman soldiers were often paid partly in salt, which sounds like the worst payday bonus ever until you realize how important it was for food preservation. This is actually where we get the word salary from. But just imagine the disappointment of working hard all month, marching across Europe and fighting barbarians, only to have your boss hand you a bag of table seasoning. It brings a whole new level of sadness to the phrase "not worth his salt." Basically, the Roman Empire was built by guys working for pickle ingredients. 11. Back in colonial Virginia, the settlers were so obsessed with nicotine that they made tobacco the official currency of the colony. I am not talking about trading a pack of cigarettes. The government actually issued paper notes backed by barrels of dried leaves sitting in warehouses. The problem was that tobacco isn't exactly gold. It crumbles, dries out, and rots. Plus, there was the issue of quality control. Imagine trying to pay your taxes, but the tax collector rejects your money because he thinks your leaves look a bit too crispy. It gives a whole new meaning to the phrase burning money because if you had a smoking habit, you were literally inhaling your rent payment. 12. In 18th century Scotland, the economy was so cash poor that common iron nails became a legitimate form of currency. Adam Smith, the father of economics, actually wrote about this because he saw people using nails to buy beer and bread at the local pub. But here is the stupidity. Nails were so valuable that some people would deliberately burn down their own wooden cottages just to sift through the ashes and recover the nails to spend them. You know your economy is broken when arson becomes a viable financial strategy to get some quick cash for a pint of ale. 13. Ancient China decided that round coins were too boring, so for centuries they used bronze casts shaped like actual knives as money. They were about the size of a pen, but looked exactly like a weapon you would use to shank someone in an alley. They even had a ring on the handle so you could string them together on your belt, which sounds convenient until you trip and accidentally stab yourself in the leg with your life savings. It is the only time in history where a pickpocket could rob you and get a free weapon to use for his next crime at the same time. 14. The Dutch in the 1630s lost their collective minds in something called tulip mania, where flower bulbs became the most valuable currency on Earth. At the peak of this insanity, a single bulb of a specific tulip could buy you a grand mansion on the best canal in Amsterdam. People were trading their life savings, land, and dignity for a dirty root that looks like an onion. The absurdity is that you couldn't even eat it. Eventually, everyone woke up, realized they were bankrupting themselves for a garden decoration, and the market crashed harder than a lead balloon. It was the original crypto bubble, but with vegetation. 15. On the American frontier, paper money was useless, so settlers and Native Americans used deerskins as the main unit of exchange. This is actually where we get the slang term "buck for a dollar." If you wanted to buy a rifle or some whiskey, you had to haul around a pile of dead animal skins that probably smelled absolutely terrible. The value depended on the quality of the skin, so if your money had a hole in it or was mangy, you were broke. It is hilarious to think that the modern US economy, with all its banks and stock markets, is linguistic slang for a dead Bambi. 16. Medieval England used a system so stupid it eventually burned down the government. They used tally sticks, which were just polished wooden sticks with notches carved into them to represent debt. You split the stick in half, kept one piece, and gave the other to the bank. It worked for centuries until 1834, when the Exchequer decided to get rid of a pile of old worthless sticks by burning them in a stove inside the House of Lords. They underestimated how well dry wood burns, and the fire got so out of control that it literally burned down the entire Houses of Parliament. They incinerated their own government trying to clean up their weird wooden money. 17. Sweden in the 17th century decided that coins were too easy to carry, so they introduced copperplate money. These were gigantic rectangular slabs of copper that could weigh up to 20 kilograms each. Imagine trying to buy a pack of gum, but you need a sled just to carry your wallet. It was physically exhausting to be rich. If you went on a shopping spree, you didn't need a purse. You needed a team of muscular servants and a wheelbarrow. It is the only currency in history that could double as a weapon or a boat anchor if you went broke. 18. In medieval Iceland, the economy smelled absolutely terrible because they used dried fish as legal tender. A standard unit of value was a single dried cod. If you wanted to buy a horseshoe or some fabric, you had to count out stiff, smelly fish carcasses. The official price list even stated that 1 yard of cloth was worth 6 fish. The best part is that if you got hungry, you could just eat your bank account, although chewing on leather-tough dried fish might break your teeth. It was a financial system where you literally had to worry about your savings getting eaten by a cat. 19. The remote island of Tristan da Cunha is so isolated that for a long time, their entire economy ran on potatoes. This wasn't a barter system. The potato was the official unit of exchange. Prices were listed in tubers, so a sweater might cost you 4 buckets of spuds. The best part is that this currency is perishable. If you saved up for a rainy day but forgot to check your basement, your life savings would literally rot or start growing eyes and staring at you. You had to eat your way through inflation just to keep your net worth stable. 20. During the American Civil War, people started hoarding coins so badly that the government ran out of metal change. The solution? They legally allowed people to use postage stamps as currency. People were walking around paying for groceries with sticky little pieces of paper that were meant for envelopes. The problem was that stamps are fragile, and if they got wet or sweaty in your pocket, they turned into a disgusting, sticky ball of useless pulp. Imagine trying to uncrumple a sweaty wad of paper just to buy a beer. It was the stickiest financial crisis in history. 21. The Aztecs loved hot chocolate so much they used cocoa beans as cash. A rabbit cost 10 beans, and a slave cost about 100. But because human beings are scammers by nature, this led to counterfeit money. People would take empty bean shells and fill them with mud or dirt to pass them off as real money. It is hilarious to think that you could get arrested for forgery just because you were playing with mud. It also meant that if you were really hungry, you could literally drink your bank account, which is a terrible strategy for long-term investment. 22. In Italy, there is a bank that accepts giant wheels of Parmigiano Reggiano cheese as collateral for loans. This isn't a joke. The Credito Emiliano Bank holds millions of euros worth of cheese in climate-controlled vaults. If a farmer needs cash, they deposit their cheese. If they default on the loan, the bank sells the cheese. It is arguably the most delicious gold standard in history. The only risk is if the bank manager gets the munchies during a night shift, the economy could collapse. It gives a whole new meaning to having a lot of cheddar. 23. Before aluminum was cheap foil for wrapping sandwiches, it was the most expensive metal on Earth. In the 19th century, it was rarer than gold. Napoleon III actually served his most important guests on aluminum plates, while the regular nobodies had to eat off plain old gold. If you had a chunk of aluminum in your pocket, you were practically a billionaire. It is hilarious to think that today we literally throw this stuff in the trash after baking a potato. But back then, tossing a soda can would be like throwing away a diamond ring. 24. During the hyperinflation in Germany in the 1920s, money became so worthless that people started using Notgeld, or emergency money, made out of practically anything they could find. Towns printed cash on wood, silk, leather, and even aluminum foil. Some places used compressed coal dust, meaning you could literally burn your wallet to stay warm in the winter. It was a chaotic time where you might get paid in porcelain tiles or old shoes. Imagine trying to fold a piece of plywood to put it in your pocket. It was less of a financial system and more of a heavy-duty arts and crafts project. 25. Ancient China was obsessed with luxury, so for a while, they used bolts of silk as a primary form of currency. This wasn't just for trading. You could actually pay your taxes in fabric. The value was calculated by the length of the cloth. Imagine walking into the tax office carrying 50 yards of smooth pajamas to pay your debt to the emperor. It was a very fashionable way to be rich, but it had a downside. If your money got wet or moths ate holes in it, you were suddenly broke. It brings a new meaning to losing your shirt in a bad investment. 26. In the Soviet Union during the Cold War, real Western blue jeans were so valuable they practically replaced the ruble on the black market. Levi's weren't just pants, they were liquid gold. You could trade a single pair of American denim for a car, an apartment, or political favors. People would smuggle them in wearing 3 pairs at a time just to get rich. It is the only time in history where your net worth was determined by how cool your pants looked. If you ripped your jeans, you didn't just ruin your outfit, you crashed your personal economy. 27. The Lobi people of Ghana used hand-forged iron snakes as currency. These weren't small coins. They were metal shapes that looked exactly like cobras. The logic was that snakes were sacred and scary, so they made perfect money because nobody would dare steal them. Imagine walking around the market with a pocket full of iron reptiles. Is that a snake in your pocket, or are you just happy to be rich? It is the most metal way to pay for groceries in human history, literally and figuratively. 28. In post-Soviet Russia during the 1990s, the ruble collapsed so hard that cash became useless, and the country reverted to the universal language of vodka. Teachers, factory workers, and even police officers were sometimes paid in bottles of booze. It wasn't uncommon to trade a bottle of vodka for a taxi ride or a haircut. It was the ultimate liquid currency. The only problem with this system is that if you had a bad week and decided to drink your sorrows away, you were literally drinking your rent money. That is a hangover that really hurts. 29. Throughout history, sugar was known as white gold and was used as currency in the Caribbean and Europe. In the 18th century, sugar was so expensive that people kept it in locked chests like jewelry. You could pay for land or livestock with a bag of white crystals. The irony is that this wealth was actively destroying the teeth of the rich people who hoarded it. It was a sweet economy until you realized that your bank account was giving you diabetes. It is the only currency that you could dissolve in tea to show off how rich you were. 30. For thousands of years, the cowrie shell was the dollar of the ancient world, used in China, Africa, and India. It is literally just a shiny little seashell that you can find on a beach. This has to be the laziest currency ever invented. Imagine the inflation if you just decided to go on a vacation to the Maldives and picked up $1 million off the sand. It is hilarious to think that ancient emperors were hoarding piles of sea snails in their treasure vaults. The only way to crash this economy was to bring a bucket and a shovel to the shoreline. 31. In Mexico during the 19th century, small change was so scarce that people started using cakes of soap as currency. Each bar had a specific value and was stamped with the name of the merchant. This gives a whole new meaning to the phrase money laundering. If you got robbed, at least the thief would have clean hands. The biggest risk to your financial stability wasn't the stock market crashing, but taking a shower. If you scrubbed too hard, you were literally washing your savings down the drain. It is the only currency in history that guaranteed you smelled good while going broke. 32. The Katanga cross from Central Africa was a copper ingot shaped like a giant letter X. It looked less like money and more like a ninja throwing star or a heavy weapon. These things were awkward to carry because you couldn't stack them, roll them, or put them in a bag without poking a hole in it. If you wanted to buy a wife, it cost about 14 crosses, which meant you had to haul a pile of jagged metal to the wedding. It is the only time in history where you could pay for groceries and potentially use your change to defend yourself in a duel. 33. In the Middle Ages, black pepper was so valuable that it was used to pay rent and taxes, known as peppercorn rent. At one point, the Visigoths demanded 3,000 pounds of pepper just to stop attacking Rome. We are talking about the stuff sitting in your kitchen shaker right now. Landlords would actually accept a bag of sneeze powder instead of gold. It is ridiculous to imagine a tenant counting out individual peppercorns to avoid eviction. The only downside was that if you inhaled your wallet too deeply, you would sneeze your assets all over the floor. 34. Ancient Mesopotamia invented the shekel, but before it was a coin, it was a measure of barley. That is right, the cradle of civilization was built on breakfast cereal. Workers were paid in bowls of grain. It was a functional system until you realized that your money attracted mice and could rot if it rained. Imagine trying to save up for a house, but you get hungry at midnight and accidentally eat your down payment. It is the ultimate struggle between building wealth and having a snack. 35. In Germany, right after World War II, the official money was worthless, so the entire population switched to using American cigarettes as cash. You didn't even have to be a smoker. You just needed packs of smokes to buy bread or shoes. A single cigarette was like a dollar bill, and a whole pack was big money. The irony is incredible. The healthiest financial decision you could make was to hoard tobacco. It was an economy where you could literally burn your money to look cool, and secondhand smoke was just the smell of capitalism. 36. In the 17th century, nutmeg was the most valuable item on the planet. The Dutch swapped the entire island of Manhattan with the British just to keep control of a tiny island that grew nutmeg. That means New York City was essentially traded for a spice you put on eggnog. People used nutmegs as a store of value because they were small, portable, and ridiculously expensive. It is mind-blowing to think that wars were fought and empires were built over a wrinkled little nut that tastes like Christmas. 37. In feudal Japan, the samurai were the coolest warriors on the planet, but their paycheck was incredibly boring. They were paid in rice. The standard unit of currency was the koku, which was defined as enough rice to feed one man for a year. Basically, the entire economy was built on carbs. The richest warlords were just guys with the biggest warehouses of grain. Imagine being a deadly assassin, but you have to carry your salary home in a burlap sack on your back. It gives a whole new meaning to breadwinner when your net worth is literally something you boil for dinner. 38. Ancient China appears on this list again, because apparently they hated convenient coins. Before they invented round money, they used spade money, which were bronze casts shaped like actual gardening shovels. These weren't tiny charms. Some were big enough that you felt like you were going to do yard work every time you went to the market. Imagine trying to fit a metal shovel into your pocket. Is that a gardening tool in your pants? Or are you just happy to see me? It is the only currency in history that you could use to literally dig yourself out of debt. 39. Native American tribes on the East Coast used wampum, which were belts made of polished clam shells. But this wasn't just money. It was also a way to write contracts and record history. The patterns on the belts had specific meanings. So if you handed someone a pile of cash, you were also handing them a legal document or a history book. It is a genius system until you realize that your entire financial status depends on finding enough pretty clams on the beach. It is basically the ancient version of wearing a Rolex, except the Rolex is made of sea snails. 40. In medieval Norway, the economy was slippery because people paid their taxes in butter. I am not making this up. It was a perfectly legal tender known as butter rent. The problem is that butter goes rancid, so you couldn't exactly save up for retirement without your house smelling like a dairy farm disaster. During times of crisis, the king would demand tons of butter from the peasants. Imagine the stress of trying to transport your life savings on a hot summer day. It brings a very literal, greasy perspective to the concept of liquid assets. 41. The Nicobar Islands in the Indian Ocean used coconuts as their main currency well into the 20th century. The exchange rates were set in nuts, so a pig might cost you 200 coconuts. This sounds tropical and fun until you think about the logistics. A coconut is heavy, round, and covered in hair. You can't put it in a wallet. If you wanted to go on a shopping spree, you needed a wheelbarrow and massive biceps. You were literally throwing giant hairy balls around to buy things. It is the only economy where your money could fall out of a tree and give you a concussion. 42. In West Africa, specifically in the strip of land from Senegal to Nigeria, the currency was cotton cloth. These were standardized strips of fabric that you could roll up and carry. It makes sense because everyone needs clothes, but the inflation was hilarious. If a ship arrived with better, softer fabric, your old scratchy cotton money suddenly became worthless. You could go bankrupt just because fashion trends changed. Imagine walking into a store and trying to pay with a t-shirt, only to be told that nobody accepts polyester anymore. 43. In the 19th century United States, coal mining companies invented the most evil and hilarious form of fake money called company scrip. They paid workers in special tokens that could only be spent at the store owned by the mining company. It is basically like getting paid in Disney dollars, but you are trapped in a coal mine in West Virginia. You technically had money, but you could only buy overpriced beans from your own boss. It was a closed loop of stupidity where you were working to earn tokens that were useless anywhere else on planet Earth. 44. Finally, let's look at the indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest and their potlatch coppers. These were giant shield-like plates made of beaten copper that represented massive wealth. But here is the ultimate flex. To prove how rich and powerful they were, chiefs would sometimes break these expensive shields or even throw them into the ocean during a ceremony. It was the ultimate "I don't even care" move. They literally destroyed their own money just to show everyone else how much they didn't need it. It is the historical equivalent of lighting a cigar with a $100 bill, but way more dramatic. So after all that, here's the uncomfortable question. If your government had to scrap modern money tomorrow and legally replace it with one thing from this list, what would you choose and why? Drop your answer in the comments and defend it. Smash like if history just made you feel smarter than most past economies. And subscribe for more gloriously dumb stories from the past.